So as I was told, we're now on air, and yeah, I'm glad to announce the keynote talk by Olli Tapio Leyno from the City University of Hong Kong, who will make a talk, who will give a talk on existential ludology, and the title of this talk is Existential Ludology and the Tragedy of the Art Game. So Olli, please, you have 40 minutes for the lecture itself and 20 minutes for Q&A section. So
thank you.
Or maybe you can, if you want, you can divide these periods of time somehow else.
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes.
All right. Then without further ado, let me just arrange all your faces on this Zoom thingy. Bring up the chat just a second. Okay, chat is here. All right. First of all, spasiba большое, Alexei, for the invitation. Dobry wieczór for everyone. Greetings from Hong Kong. My name is Olli Tapio Leyno. I'm an associate professor at City University of Hong Kong School of Creative Media. And I realized that I've taken the liberty of adjusting my title for today's talk. I wrote Existential Hermeneutics and the Tragedy of the Art Game. But I think the message will come across the same, nevertheless. So I will talk about art games from the perspectives of philosophy of computer games, phenomenology, existentialism, hermeneutics, and the sort of perspective, epistemological perspective, if you will, is that of a first-person perspective on games, understanding games as played, not games as ideas of games, as ludology would have it, but games understood in first person, and also games as situated, temporally and culturally situated performances. And the agenda for today, I will first speak briefly about the technological specificity of art games in relation to how various game philosophers and art historians have conceptualized it before. And that gives me the platform to say that art games are tragic. This is mainly based on two papers I've given before, the DIGRA 2013, Playability and its Absence, and the more recent Tragedy of the Art Game, which are both available on the DIGRA website if you are interested in this topic. And I'll give you the conclusion straight away in a short format, so you don't have to guess as I go on where is this going to go. So at the end of this, I would like to argue that the whole idea or the whole phenomenon of art games is tragic, since art games cannot satisfy both the player and the artist at the same time. On the one hand, so we have two options, two directions into which art games can go. The first option is to go to the direction of interactive art, such as the game Proteus, which I trust you have played. These kinds of games, they raise questions, but they provide no answers. And this allows the artist to come to the forefront again as the authority on the meaning of the game. The other option is for art games to be like computer games, allow players to become skillful in the game by first raising questions and then, as games do, allowing players to find the answers to these questions from the game itself without the designer's help. The problem, though, here is that when the players kind of game the game in their own style, it implies disregarding any sort of extraneous, extra-ludic meaning the artist wanted to include in the game. For example, the Molle Industries game Dogness, which could be read as a critique of xenophobia, but it might as well be played just as a dog breeding simulator. So the first option is not good for the gamer because there is nothing to game. Second option is no good for the artist because there is no room for the artist. And I can't see any way of reconciling these. That's why I think it is tragic. So this is where I will hopefully arrive in about 35 minutes from now. And as I go on, when you have questions, please feel free to type them in the chat already, so you don't forget them. And I will get back to you in the end. So I shall start with what I have called the notion of gameplay condition. This provides us a bridge into this topic of art and games. You might have noticed in 2013, the question of games as art has no longer been an issue since 2013, thanks to the curator of MoMA, Paola Antonelli, who included Pac-Man, I believe some other games as well, into the collection of MoMA. And that sort of settled the issue we have had for a while, whether computer games are art. I'm speaking sort of ironically here, because I'm not always sure whether computer games and museums go so well together, or computer games and sort of traditional notions of art. Here is an image by Julian Oliver from 2010. You might remember the late film critic Roger Ebert, who wrote something about computer games and art around that time, which apparently inspired Julian Oliver to make this picture of the Ebert Gallery of Contemporary Art, where computer games are exhibited as art alongside traditional kinds of artworks. I'm not sure if this is a meaningful debate to enter into, what makes computer games count as art. Are games art implies the extremely hard question of what is art in the first place. And in my experience, it's best to leave that to the analytic philosophers who do aesthetic, who are good at saying what is what and what is not what, or the social scientists who can simply ask 100 people, is this art? And then be happy with that answer. So let's not go for the either or question, but rather let's ask, how are computer games art? Let's try to operationalize any differences we find between these two ostensibly defined categories of art and games, and see what could we gain by looking at games through the lens of art, looking at art through the lens of games. And I should also provide a disclaimer that when I talk about art, I'm thinking of like electronic art, interactive art, more than traditional fine arts. But I think if we manage to operationalize these differences, we will get new perspectives on game criticism and art criticism alike. So to recap, let's leave behind the question of whether computer games are art, and rather ask the question, how are they art? And here, doing a brief lit review reveals interesting positions. There is Graham Kirkpatrick in his book, The Aesthetic Theory and the Video Game, who notes that games aspire to be artistic, but art resists games. And Katja Kwastek in the survey of the history of new media art, or digital art, or electronic art, I forgot, but in that thick survey book by Katja Kwastek, she also looks at these overlaps of interactive art and games. And she notes that I quote, the specification of a particular goal, as is usual in rule-based games, is quite uncommon in artistic projects. More common are analogies to free, aimless play. Next up is Oria Harvey and Michael Samun, who are better known as the art game group Tale of Tales, who made, for example, the Graveyard game. They had this manifesto for not games, I believe it was called, where they note that beautiful moments in games are all too often shattered by the demands of the game. This quote in particular made me wonder, would these moments be as beautiful as they are if it wasn't for the less beautiful part that comes before and after? Remember at the time when GTAs still had not a fully open world in the beginning, where you would have to unlock parts of the level, and then you would go to the new level. Oftentimes there were bridges between these parts of levels. And when you transition from one level to another, you had that moment on the bridge where you can look back on the city where you already completed all the missions, and the new level where all these challenges await. And you would stand on that bridge, look back and look forward. I thought that would be a beautiful moment in the game, but it is created as beautiful just because of all the difficulties that came before it and will come after it. Then there's John C. Sharp, who in his book calls for games as a medium, as a creative substrate like oil paint or charcoal, not media like film or TV. Reading these made me wonder, what is so special about computer games as a medium for art? And at least how I see it, it is this feeling of gameplay, which is somewhat difficult to put your finger on. One might call it playability, one might call it gameness, something that interactive art, for example, does not have. And to try to get at that, I turned to Hans-Georg Gadamer, who had this quote on ontology of play. He noted that the player enjoys the freedom of decision, which is at the same time endangered and irrevocably limited. Even in the case of games in which one tries to perform tasks that one has set oneself, there is a risk that they will not work, succeed, or succeed again, which is the attraction of the game. What does this mean in computer games? Where do we see this? What is the material correlate of what Gadamer is talking about in a contemporary computer game? Well, my examples might not be most contemporary. This is Telero Boxer for Nintendo Virtual Boy, hence the beautiful red color. You lost, you're worthless and weak. Go home and be a family man. You and your friends are dead. Game over. I think this is what Gadamer is talking about, the possibility of failure. Regardless of what we think of the accuracy of Ludology's claims of computer games being games or transmedial games or whatnot, they might not be games as such, but nevertheless, they seem to manifest this risk characteristic to gameplay that Gadamer was referring to. What this means is that this technological artifact we call computer game gives its player a freedom of choice while simultaneously making her responsible for this freedom by resisting her project of playing. This is a way of saying that games feel difficult and we can fail in them. I find this is something that is shared by all of these things we don't hesitate calling computer games, but it is, of course, implemented differently. In the famous Russian game Tetris, our responsibility is manifested in the blocks. If you leave a gap in your lines of blocks, that sort of signals your being towards death in the game. That block brings death closer to you. In GTA, if you die for more than 4 times, no more lives, game is over. And if you drive faster, you risk a deadly accident. So this is implemented differently in different games, but we will find this dynamic of being responsible for the freedom you enjoy in most games. Most things we don't hesitate calling computer games. And I call this gameplay condition before, and I consider this as that against which players can then do whatever it is they want to do in the game. To borrow the words of T.S. Henricks, they can realize themselves against this gameplay condition. That makes gameplay condition a baseline for interpreting computer games and relating to computer games as performances. In the following, I'd like to elaborate on this, these two ideas. Gameplay condition is the baseline for interpretation and for relating to games as performances. And I'll begin with interpretation. I trust that some of you might have played The Sims, but has any of you created a level 7 flaming birthday cake in The Sims? I haven't. I had to take a picture of this from online. It takes a lot of cooking skill to create a level 7 flaming birthday cake. We might wonder, what is that level 7 flaming birthday cake? Is it players' imagination? Is it some sort of idiosyncratic thing? But it is not. It is deeply rooted in the material of the computer game. It gets its meaning from the gameplay condition, from The Sims. They say that The Sims is a open-ended and expressive game. But at least The Sims 2 indeed has a game over screen. Game is over if all of your Sims die, for example. And for example, I mean, they may die in a fire, for example. How do fires start? Fires start if you try to cook while your Sims do not know how to cook. So if you want to avoid fire, you need to learn cooking. To learn cooking, you need a book from which you can learn cooking, i.e. a cookbook, which you keep in a bookshelf, which you bought with money, which you earned through work, and you got your job as you had education. And this list goes on. And ultimately, the meaning of the level 7 flaming birthday cake is its relation through these sort of somewhat convoluted steps through this instrumental rational ontology back into the baseline of being responsible for your freedom in the game. So it is not just a birthday cake, it's a monument to your cooking skill, which is meaningful as fending off fire in the kitchen. But imagine if the Sims did not have the risk of death, then things would be somewhat different. There would not be such an instrumental rational ontology in the game. We would have to have some sort of a collective imagination or a social construction for what things mean, because there would be no sort of freedom responsibility dynamic as the baseline from which meaning would originate. So this example was for The Sims, but I guess you could do a similar analysis of any AAA game these days. Why I chose Sims for this, because originally Sims was the sort of hard nut to crack for Ludology, since there is no goal as such and there is no challenge. And remember, it was called a borderline case by early Ludology. So I chose that as an example to argue that this sort of phenomenological first-person perspective can shed some light on the meaning of even those borderline cases. But okay, I said I would also talk about gameplay condition and performance. Keeping this in mind, I'll show you the next example, which is call it a game, call it a participatory art installation, whichever way you will. It's called Mega GURP by Douglas Wilson from 2011. And as you can see from the image, it's an adaptation of Bennett Foddy's GURP, where instead of using keyboards for controlling the avatar, it uses 4 dance mats placed on the floor, where each trigger on the dance mat corresponds to a key on the keyboard. And this is what it looks like when Douglas is playing this game. So it takes somewhat a certain level of acrobatic skill to reach from one key to another. So it's the same finger acrobatics as in GURP, but adapted to a sort of a full body interface. How do we relate to this as audience members? At least on 2 levels. We can look at it as played by another embodied human being like ourselves. We can observe how far the player can stretch his hands or make other observations of the human player in this world. And in this sense, looking at this performance can be considered as exemplifying what Erika Fischer-Lichte talks about when he talks about mediality of performance being based on the notion of co-presence of bodies. When we look at a performance, we can relate to it by knowing that we are humans and we have bodies. So has the performer. So we have a sort of sense of what's going on the stage just by the similarity of bodies. It's like Daft Punk had this song, "We are human after all, much in common after all." That's what Fischer-Lichte is talking about. But the thing with Mega GURP performance here is that just on their own, the acrobatics are not that complicated. And the graphics and the sound and the sort of stuff that happens on the stage, if you will, is not really that interesting on its own. Luckily, there is the other dimension. We can look at Douglas, the performer here, as being subjected to the gameplay condition, knowing that Douglas is in a difficult spot there. He will die if he can't reach Q. And here we go beyond the mediality of performance as we know it from Fischer-Lichte. Douglas is not going to die, but Douglas in the game is going to die. So we have mediality of gameplay, which is accessible only to those who know what kind of condition GURP or mega GURP imposes on its players. If someone who has never played GURP is witnessing this performance, this second dimension will be lost on them. But it is in relation to the second dimension where the somewhat trivial acrobatics and the less than so interesting audiovisuality become meaningful. Like the flaming birthday cake on level 7 gets its meaning from the risk of death in The Sims 2, also the moves and the gestures that Douglas is making on the dance mats become meaningful in relation to the risk of being in the game of Mega GURP. So this is what gameplay condition can do to us. It can help us interpret computer games in terms of objects, events, and encounters they contain, but it can also shed light on the ways in which we can understand computer games played as performance. Here's another example of such a sort of duality of conditions by Pain Station, by the art group //fur/ and so on. Those of you who have not seen this, who have not heard about this artwork before, it's a sort of a gaming console on the screen. There is a sort of a screen embedded in the table where there is a game of Pong being played. And players are supposed to control the Pong paddle with their one hand and keep their other hand on top of this this part of the machine where you can see this little thing sticking out. That thing sticking out is a whip, and inside the table there is a sort of, I don't know, a heater which can burn your hand, and also 2 electrodes you can see which give you electric shocks. So every time you lose a ball in Pong, you will get physical punishment on your hand, and if you lift your hand, you automatically lose the game. So I think this again speaks to this this duality of these conditions. There is the human being in this world, and then there is the players being in the game world, and sometimes they interact in interesting ways. All right, this gives us the basis to move on to talk about the tragedy of art games, I believe, which is what I will do next. And I will let you in on a big secret, how to create art games. It's simple, it only takes 3 steps. Step 1 is to make a game. Step 2 is to remove the failure condition. Then you are done. Step 3, players will be confused and think it is art. Like this dog here. It will be ambiguous, there will be lots of meaning to explore, and the confused players will think that it's deep and profound, like art oftentimes is. But hold your horses, it's not so easy. Art games are potentially tragic, as I was suggesting. They can never satisfy both the artist and the player, because the interests of the player and the interests of the artist are opposite. What does the artist want? At least if we believe Miguel Sicart and Douglas Wilson, the game designer wants to be visible. And one way of doing so is to become an authority holding to the keys of the interpretation of the work. What does the player want? The player wants to, am I being tautological if I say that the player wants to play? But that is what the player wants. The player wants to play the game. The player wants self-realization. Player wants, as if I should put it in quotation marks, player wants a new instrument to play with, or a new instrument to play. Player wants to be the king or queen of the game they are playing. But these are not necessarily compatible. They are in fact diametrically opposed. What is the future of art games? Art games can continue to mimic interactive art. Impress those who have never heard about interactive art before, i.e. be not computer games at all. or they can embrace gameness and forget about art altogether. And I think this is somewhat tragic. My example of this is Proteus, which I mentioned before, where we have free exploration with no risk of failure and no gameplay condition. Proteus falls back on being interactive art. That sort of interactive art thing that Lev Manovich can tell us everything we need to know about, a modular, navigable, and all the favorite paradigms of 1990s. It's both meaningless and unethical at the same time. And I'm just, I put Proteus here, but I could be quite likely talking about any of these similar titles recently. They fall back on being interactive art, I said. What do I mean with interactive art? Example by Bernd Lintermann, a work called Sono Remorphed, which is a 180 degrees projection. In the middle of the projection is a console and a chair. User sits by the console using the buttons and the sliders and whatnot on the console. The user can alter the shape of this spectacle on the screen and also change the sounds that the work is emitting. There is no way to succeed or to fail in this artwork. It is just a beautiful thing to look at and listen to. So this is what I'm saying that these so-called art games fall back on. I say they're meaningless. Let's investigate this. Investigate this with the help of procedural rhetorics. In Proteus, there is no failure, so there can also be no instrumental rational ontology, such as in the Sims example. So nothing has meaning given by the game. No performance in the game is any better than any other performance. In terms of its procedural rhetorics, these kinds of simulations of absolute freedom can only lead us to very basic existential considerations, like what is this? Why am I here? Do my choices matter? Who am I? Or even as Bogost was writing, am I? So naturally games raise questions, right? That's what oftentimes game playing is, trying to find answers for these questions. But Proteus does not provide answers to these questions. When we leave the island at the end, we still have no idea what was going on. So I go back to Espen Aarseth, who in 1999 suggested that games are about aporia and epiphany. Then unfortunately, art games seem to stop at aporia. And art game making becomes this exercise of weaponizing meaninglessness and boredom for the artist's own intentions. Allegory can be drawn from this sort of art games to Wim Wenders' movie Himmel über Berlin, Wings of Desire, where you might remember these two angels who were bored with their infinite existence. They wanted to become humans. Nothing felt like anything to them. I will not show you the clip in the interest of time, but here is one of the angels remembering his memories of visiting a tent in the desert where they were served lamb and wine. But he's not happy with his memory because he remembers that it was only a pretense. This is us when we are playing these art games. We have only an illusion of freedom. Following Jean-Paul Sartre, who noted that freedom is possible only in a resisting world. It seems to follow that the freedom in games like Proteus is but an illusion of freedom. And everything can mean anything, or everything means nothing at the same time. Everything we do is like these angels, just pretends nur zum Schein. No instrumental rationality of objects, no use relations between objects. Freedom is an illusion, and so any possibility for transgression is also an illusion. But we know that computer games are not like this. Computer games have potential for so much more. I will briefly mention Michel Westerlaken's project of doing a vegan run in Zelda Breath of the Wild as an example of what computer games can let us do. I mentioned the word self-realization before. I'm coming back to this. We know that computer games afford what we might call expert play. knowing the game so well that you can use the game as an instrument for your own project. And what happens in this expert play is the discovery of the possibility of self-realization using the game. How the game allows me to take on my own projects by using the game as an object, and then also objects within the game. Doing not what the designer wanted me to do, but doing what I want to do in the game. And here is the Hendricks quote I mentioned before in his book, Play and the Human Condition. He talks about play as self-realization. He does not obviously talk about computer games as such, but I think it is nevertheless quite fitting. He notes that play as self-realization requires knowing the weak spots of the world, or of the system in this case, against which then the players can assert themselves. So I assume when Michelle Westerlaken did the vegan run of Zelda Breath of the Wild, she was already quite an experienced Zelda player. Perhaps a newbie could not be able to do things like this. So there is the knowledge of knowing how to use the objects in the game, knowing how to use these objects to survive the resistance of the game, and finally discovering the possibility of using the in-game objects, events, and encounters to realize your own projects. In addition to Westerlaken's vegan project, we could also talk about farming in DayZ, or clearing lines of one color only in Tetris, or becoming a pacifist in America's Army, like Joseph Delap did in his art project. So, I'm not saying that it has to be quantifiable, the project of self-realization, not even successful, noting that these projects are often extraneous to the game, i.e. Zelda, the computer game artifact, did not give Michelle Westerlaken any extra score for being vegan. It's all for the players themselves. But nevertheless, this project is resisted according to the gameplay condition. It's not imagination. It's not make-believe that Zelda was a vegan. Zelda did in the world of Zelda what vegans would do. It is not idiosyncratic. It's not imagination. So this is the potentiality that is missed by art games. But it's understandable. If the artist wants to be the one holding the strings of the performance, then it seems to make sense to not give so much agency to the player. I said art games are unethical. I'm not sure how much time we have for this, but I'll try. Katja Kwastek in the same book, History of Interactive Art, noted that interactive art is based on an artistically configured interaction proposition, while on the other, its realization depends on the recipient's action. So I guess what Katja Kwastek is getting at here is that it's a give and take relationship. Both the author and the audience need each other. We might ask, what kind of relationship is this in games? What kind of relationship is this in art games? In art games, we find that the audience must invest the non-trivial effort to complete the work, to realize the artist's vision, but they are not being offered a chance to play in their own way. So there is no vegan run of Proteus, for example. There is no way to try to claim the game back from its designers. And even perhaps more importantly, transgression in art games is not even acknowledged as a transgression. Isn't that the best totalitarian strategy, to not even acknowledge transgression? It didn't happen in Zelda when Westerlaken was being a vegan. Zelda resisted, Zelda acknowledged, Zelda resisted, giving existential weight to this action of being a vegan. So I would say it's a profoundly more ethical relation between Zelda and its player than it is with Proteus and its player, which really needs me only to carry the camera around on the island. So I would argue that from the perspective of playability, merely interactive art is unethical. And there is a very fine line between exploitation and authorship. But this is nothing new. We can see this fine line of exploitation and authorship already in late 60s when Alan Capro was organizing his happenings, which were hailed as empowering the audience and letting the audience participate in the artwork. So these were these sort of theatrical performances where audience was invited to join in the activity. For example, given little scripts or little instructions, asking them to join in. But through these instructions and scripts, Capro kept the event, kept the strings in his own hands. Circuit Dinklov writes that under absolute control by the organizer, the happening does not seem to be a step toward viewer participation, but a precisely elaborated artistic act that guarantees the integration of participants as material. So as I was saying, there is nothing new in this fine line between participation and exploitation. Art games are simply continuing the tradition that was already started by Capro. I would like to argue that art game design is an abusive game design strategy. You might remember the paper by Douglas Wilson, Miguel Sicart from 2014, DIGRA, on abusive game design. In this paper, they observed that mainstream game design is in trouble because designers have to be egoless advocates for the player, always thinking, what is it that the player wants? Always giving the player the crack that they are addicted to. And they suggested to break the conventions of game design in order to make the designer visible again, create more room for the designer in the gameplay situation, and to establish a dialectical relation with the player. Interesting and laudable project. And it seems that Proteus and other art games potentially succeed with this abusive game design strategy. But the question then becomes, what is the price? What price do we pay for this abusive strategy to work? And as far as I understand, the mechanic is so that the art game is intentionally made meaningless, boring, etc. But the designer holds the key or the secret sauce or the injection of meaning into the experience. So the game itself cannot answer the questions it raises. Thus, the designer is required, and the designer is sort of celebrated as the authority who can give meaning to the game. I have an example of this by Hong Kong game designer Alan Kwan, who made a game called Hallway, a game in which I will explain it to you first before I show you the artist statement. It's a game where we look at the world from the point of view of a maybe 4 or 5-year-old boy who is walking in a hallway of an apartment building. And he can hear sounds of fighting from behind the doors in the hallway. Some doors open, others don't. Those doors which open, they always lead back to the same hallway. So you could say that the boy is kind of trapped in the hallway, cannot escape. Only can hear the sounds of fighting from behind the doors, but can't get out of this situation. Even though there is agency as to opening the doors and walking through them, but it brings no change to the state of affairs. So the obvious question raised is why? What does this mean? Why the doors are like that? And then in the artist statement, there's the answer. I quote Alan Kwan. Inspired by my own childhood experience, the single-player game places the players into the first-person perspective of a 5-year-old child who, after being expelled by his father, wanders in the hallway outside his home. By the absence of explicit cause and effect mechanics and straightforward answers, the game encourages uncovering meaning for oneself by engaging with this absorbing yet surreal hallway, where the players become wanderers, striving to find personal clarity and to wrestle with the inscrutability of childhood memories. I think this is abusive art game design par excellence. I am beginning to conclude now. What do we have to say about this situation, art games being like this? Obviously, works like Hallway, Proteus, and other walking simulators invite us to participate them in the paradigm of art games. But as we observe, without the possibility of failure, they fall back on being just conventional interactive art. Perhaps something we might even call playful interaction. And as such, they could be exhaustively described with these paradigms of late 90s when people were fascinated with interactive media art. They talked about navigation, exploration, selection. You might remember these vocabularies. But the question is that what we want in the year 2022 or in 2020s to go back to the 90s? Alan Capro's happenings originally took place in the late 60s, but sometime in 2010, they were staged again in London. And this theater critic of Daily Telegraph, Richard Dormant, went to see one of these happenings in the year 2010. And he wrote in his review in the Telegraph that in the late 50s, for an artist to ask an audience to watch people performing pedestrian activities was a radical innovation. Perhaps implying that it might not be so anymore 50 years after. So in this same vein of argument, maybe navigation and exploration were radical innovations in 1990s in the context of interactive art, but they are not such things anymore in 2020s. Certainly not enough to define the artistic substrate of computer games as art, what John C. Sharp was calling for. So I used to be so hopeful, and I used to end here. I used to say that if we want there to be computer games referred to as art games, as distinct from all other forms of electronic art, they need to be playable. But now I realize that I was being young and naive and wishful in this hope. My second to last example is Molle Industries' Dogness, which I have mentioned before, which can be played as a casual dog breeding simulator. Those of you who have not played this game, you combine these dogs and you try to get to the perfect dog. How does it stand as an art game? Well, I recap now with this distinction that I showed you in the beginning. We can have those art games without gameplay condition, which fall back on being interactive art. Or we can have art games with gameplay condition, which seem to resemble computer games. And I would put Dogness, the game that I just showed you, in this second category. So whereas these interactive art games, they raise questions, they provide no answers. That is the strategy by which the artist can become visible. The second type of art games, they raise questions and they allow players to find the answers from within the game. Players can become skillful in finding these answers. They can game the game, play it in their own style, use it as automated skill tester, as Karhulahti would say. But unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, gaming the game implies disregarding any sort of meaning that the artist wanted to embed in the game. As I was saying, this can be played as a perfectly fun little dog breeding simulator, and the critique of xenophobia that is in the game can be completely bypassed if it is treated just as a dog breeding simulator. But these interactive artworks, they can't be gamed, and there is no way to try to wrestle the game back from the designer. It is always the designer who is in control. We are basically giving our free labor to realize the designer's vision without any chance of revolting against the designer. One might say that, okay, in this second type of art games, then where is the art? Aren't these just games? Yes, I agree with this position. But I think it also turns attention to what happens in the game. What is it that the player is doing with the game? So I think if we are searching for any kind of artistic value, the artistic value is not to be found from the game itself, but the game is situated in some sort of context in which it becomes a performance, and the artistic value would then be in this performance. But the tragedy here indeed is that I can't see a way of these two being reconciled. Either the gamer will be disappointed or the artist will be disappointed. And my last example with which I exemplify this position comes from Jason Nelson, who is a poet and a game designer who in 2008 made this game called I Made This, You Play This, We Are Enemies. And the directions for the gameplay are as follows. You can see them in the bottom right-hand corner, where number 4 is stop trying to get it. And with this example, I shall end. Thank you for your attention. And here are my references, just in case.
Yes, great. Thank you very much, Olli. And yeah, that was a great talk. Does anybody have questions? Yeah, I see Daria has a question. Please, Daria.
Thank you very much. It was a very amazing report. It made me look at things from other side that you can see. Then I will speak that it's just that I can't see before. But I have one remark and one question. One remark just about yes, I am quite agree that you cannot fail in art game, but only if the goal of the game is not that make you lose. But it's not a question. The question, I need some form of clarification because it's very interesting for me about illusion of freedom. Of course, yes, that in art game you do that, it's expected of you. Yes, I understand it, but not in all video games. We have so much of freedom. Option for choices or free words, and why you see here so much difference? Because the many of video games and computer games has a very determined plot and the development of it. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for the question. Diversity. There is like story games, what Jesper, you'll call progression games, and then there are emergence games. And even with this simple distinction, you could say that this freedom thing is more important in emergence games than in progression games, for example. That would seem to make sense. On the other hand, I'm not sure whether it is meaningful to quantify the amount of freedom in a sort of any comparative sense, beyond saying whether we have it or whether we don't. Tetris, do we have freedom in Tetris? I don't know. I think we have. And you might say it's a very, what can you do with your freedom? You can't do much about your freedom. So what? That's then an aesthetic assessment of the game. In this game, the freedom is quite narrow. But nevertheless, there is a freedom of some kind. And why am I so confident in saying that there is a freedom of some kind? Because I see resistance. I see resistance in Tetris. I see Tetris being difficult. I see myself being on the edge. Can I make it? Can I make it? Can I make it? The presence of the resistance means there is also freedom. And then we can enter into the debate of what kind of freedom is it? Is it how broad is it? Or what color is it? Or what does it smell like? As we like. But I think these belong to the realm of game criticism. I mean, these are statements of game criticism, saying that in Tetris there is not much room for transgression. In Tetris, my freedom is quite restricted compared to, I don't know, DayZ or GTA, for example. We just made aesthetic assessments of games. I don't know if this satisfies you, but that's what I can say.
Yeah, so great. We have 2 more questions from Leonid and Ksenia. So Leonid, I think you can go first.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry. First of all, thank you for your presentation. And can you for a minute switch to the previous slide with
Yes.
bibliography? And I have a small question. I'm sorry, maybe I just missed the part where you talked about it, because at the beginning of your presentation, I had to leave for a few minutes. It's a question about notion of failure as,
Yes.
how can I say it, fundamental for video games. I mean, Sims is a good example of the way that failure in video games are extremely subjective, I think. I mean, for many people, the goal of playing Sims is to kill the Sim in the most spectacular and funny way. So the entire burning down your house situation would be a complete success. In the same way, isn't it possible theoretically? Yes, obviously no one would do this in practice, but theoretically to create some sort of goal for yourself in Proteus, like to make some animal run from one side of the island to the other, and therefore to fail in reaching this goal.
Thank you. This is a very interesting question as well. Yes, we can set goals for ourselves in Proteus. We can set goals for ourselves in the Sims. But the difference between Proteus and Sims is that is the absence of a goal. There are some kind of goals. I hesitate calling them goals, but they are hard-coded in the Sims, in the sense that it doesn't matter if it is you or me who is playing it, these things in the materiality will be there. Is it the goal to keep all your Sims alive? I don't know. That's why I didn't call it the goal. I call it the condition. Sims makes us responsible for the freedom we enjoy. Basically, it is telling us that you can do anything you like in this game, using all these objects that you have been given, as long as you keep your Sims alive. And that's why these objects, these encounters, like the level 7 flaming birthday cake, they have certain existential weight to themselves. They are not just our imagination. They have some sort of factic existence in the world of the game, not just about imagination. Whereas then in Proteus, if we let's say we chase the chicken in Proteus and we want to say the chicken means something to us, we have to imagine that ourselves. The chicken in Proteus doesn't mean anything on its own. And I think the Sims, the difference there is that even the Sims has some kind of, the Sims has already done some groundwork on giving meaning to things before the player comes in. And then it's of course free to reappropriate this in any way. But of course, human beings can do anything they want with computer games, not just play the computer games. We can, as you say, our goal would be to kill all the Sims as quickly as possible. Even in that project, the existential weight or the meaning given to objects in the Sims, those meanings would be there even in that project. No matter what we do, unless, I don't know, unless we become hackers and we use a debugger to change the game or something like this, we can't really transcend the condition within which we exist in the game. We can sort of reappropriate it and go over and over again and say, dying does not mean anything to me. I'm willing to die 10 times per hour, fine. But even in that cycle, then you are still subjected to the condition for your existence in the game. Another thing I might say, as I was thinking of your parallel of setting some goals in the Sims, setting some goals in Proteus, can we then say that we are playing, we are using Proteus or we are using the Sims to play a game? Perhaps. I don't know, Leonid, if this answers your question. Feel free to follow up.
Yes, thank you very much. Maybe I will give a follow-up if we have some more time, but
okay.
There are other questions, so that's it for now. Thank you very much. It was great.
Yeah, great. Thank you for this short discussion. And Ksenia Zharnova has one more question. Please, Ksenia.
Yes, hello. I even make a video. Thank you for the presentation. Actually, I have two questions. First is about, you said that Paula Antonelli added games to the exhibition, but she added them as design objects. So like, for example, a chair. So I think that's the question is still open of how to exhibit games in galleries, because the games are meant to be played. But that's probably a question for discussion. If you have time, I would like to hear your thoughts about that. But the question that really bothers me, you said that tragic, the art games are tragic because there is no room for an artist. If the game has gameplay, like if the game is literally played as game should be played. But I guess that isn't there a beauty in all that possibilities of interpretation? So maybe this can be an artistic tool that the player can interpret the artist's idea in his way. Maybe it's a good thing.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree with your second position, that there is indeed beauty in the possibilities of interpreting what the designers put there. Maybe, I mean, your question makes me reconsider how I should frame my argument. Maybe it is indeed a criticism of a certain idea of art that has been associated with games. It seems to me that if we hold on to this idea as the artist, as a holder of the key to the meaning, then there is no room for artists in this kind of gameplay, this kind of playable art games. But it is by no means of course, the only notion of art or artists that can be out there. So I can only say I agree with you that there is beauty in the sort of depths of this. I might even say that in this ontology that gives meaning to objects in the game, isn't it beautiful how level 7 flaming birthday cake becomes level 7 flaming birthday cake? If that's someone's idea of beauty, then that makes sense. So perhaps it's also a call for recontextualizing what we mean with art and being an artist in the context of games. And here I take the liberty of going back just to this slide of Westerlaken's veganism project. Surely there is some art here, and surely there is some artistic value in this act that is not only that part which was created by Nintendo or whoever created by the game. There is some artistic value in this as a performance, where part of that artistry is relegated to Michel Westerlaken as the actor in this performance. So indeed, things are perhaps more complicated than how I try to present them with these two options, and it implies rethinking of the notion of art and artist in the context of games. As to your first question, I once tried to exhibit computer games in an art gallery, and I can also agree with you on that point that it's difficult as games have to be played. The ideal environment for exhibiting games would look like a computer lab or would look like a gaming cafe. And of course, the museum people who are so stuck with their ideas of what the gallery should look like are not necessarily open up to turning a museum into a gaming cafe. So I'm not so hopeful in that regard either. Thank you. I hope this addresses your question.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I think you, Ksenia, for these questions. I think that was a very fruitful discussion. And there is one more question by Renata. And then after Renata's question, we will go to the talks by Daria and Ksenia. Yeah, hi, Renata.
Hello, and thank you, Olli, for this very inspiring talk. I also have two sets of questions. The first one being that I agree with Ksenia, I find your take on art and the concept of failure in games a bit limiting, because for example, when I play Assassin's Creed, which it won't be considered a very artful game in that sense, when I perform a set of movements that I kill someone in a very spectacular way, I consider that art. I find real beauty in that, and I enjoy it immensely, like the choreography and the dance movements of it all. And also, I I think there can be games without the condition of having a win or lose scenario of failure ingrained in them. Role-playing games don't have to have a failure, and it's still a game. So I'm not sure how you comment on that. And the other question is that how you, like, I think what you're saying is even more prominent in multiplayer games when one of the players is trying to do art at the expense of all the other players. I remember one project that someone was trying to write names of fallen soldiers in the Counter-Strike chat, and everyone got infuriated, understandably so, because they were just simple people that wanted to do a playthrough, and someone just hacked their chat and didn't help them win the game at all. So yeah, I would like your opinion on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for these questions. Actually, that was the thing, I think, what I was referring to by Joseph Delap, Dead in Iraq. It was Joseph Delap who was speaking the names of dead soldiers. And if he was shot, he would just respawn and continue. So he was definitely making art in the game. Right, so why I insist on failure, because I think it has something to do with the technological specificity of computer games. I'm driven by this idea that if we want to talk about computer games as a distinct category, different from other related things, we must be able to anchor it into something that is materially pertinent in the object. And I think this failure condition is something. Ludology said that it would be the gameness. It would be the rules and the goals and the challenges and winning and losing. I don't agree with that. And you might remember Espen Aarset had the observation that he feels unemployed at the end of the game. And I think that is sort of telling of Ludology's failure in grasping what computer games are. That at the end of the game, you don't feel like the feelings of elation and pride that you won the game. But no, you feel useless. You wanted to stay in the world of the game, but you can't. You are out. You are unemployed. So I think the technological specificity of computer games is not to be found from the ludological, the sort of ludus kind of games and play. But nevertheless, there is the experience of risk involved in computer game play. And that I hope to capture with this failure condition. So no winning. Winning is not important. Failing, dying is more important. And of course, there are games without this condition. As you said, RPGs, for example, they cater to the players using, they give meanings to things in a different way, if you will. But going back to your Assassin's Creed example, I wonder if you couldn't, if it didn't, you mentioned a set of movements, and you mentioned the beauty and the choreography of these movements, but you also used the word to kill someone, indicating that it has some kind of significance in relation to gameplay of Assassin's Creed. And then it sort of prompts the question of where does that significance come from? What is so important of killing someone? Probably not even related to trying to win the game, trying to beat the game, trying to get 100% achievement. But don't have to go that far, just to be able to stay in the game. Maybe you want that weapon that you get after completing this mission. And to complete this mission, you have to kill someone. So it's somehow you are still implicated in this instrumental rationality of the logic of the objects in the world. And the meaning of these comes from, they are somehow related to your existence in the game. I don't know, does this answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, yes, thank you very much as well. And yeah, I actually also had a question and I typed it into the chat room, so maybe only you will be able to answer it to me in a personal message, maybe. Okay. Because yes. Because we don't have enough time right now. And thank you again for your talk. And
now
for
your attention and questions.
Sorry.
Thank you all for your attention and your questions, and thanks again, Alexei, for the opportunity.
Yes, great. Thank you too. The feeling is mutual. And now we are going to the talks by other participants, and the first one will be made by Daria Bunyeva, and the title is Virtual Reality Between Theater, Art, and Video Game. So Daria, you have 15 minutes for all, so try to spare some time for Q&A section.
Thank you very much, and I think I need to say that my little review seems to be on the other side of what Dr. Olli has reported so convincingly to us. I'm just wondering what has happened now in the field of virtual, artistic virtual reality, in which creators from different fields, theater, cinema, games, art, are intervened, and we can see how a new style, how oh, I'm sorry, I can't demonstrate my screen because they have the previous one.
Yeah, Olli, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry. Just a minute. From the beginning. Yes, just the yes. So that there are we can see that now there's new form of artistic artistic product that actually we can't see the border between theater, art, and game. Now we can see that virtual reality can be used for very different application, engineering, education, journalism, medicine, commerce, and so on. But what I want to speak about, I can call it artistic virtual reality because it has no specific practical goals. And here it's really problem to separate virtual and physical reality because the human could be in all of this and every moment, and actually we could speak about to what extent he or she belong to any of them. So I want to speak about one characters of virtual reality that I called virtuality. That I mean that it characterizes the degree of individuals belonging to virtual reality. And here there is a little figure that demonstrates the form that could virtual reality can be seen, and actually some characteristic that I want to speak about. The naturalism actually is the first and the most discussed feature of virtual reality, and actually it can be naturalism of very different places because, for example, in pandemic time, even the most usual places that as park or something like this can be interesting for people that should be in their homes and their houses and their flats. And but of course, virtual reality could give the experience of many different places, for example, moon. And of course, it can be not only the natural reality that demonstrate the real world, but also the reality of that created by artists, by something like games or art or paint or something like this. And the space can be presented or as 360-degree virtual reality. Then you could see everything, and that you could actually you can or cannot interact with here is the example that artistic just artistic video game that you could grab and things that can be, and the another variant and free movement virtual reality that you can move and do something in this space of virtual reality. Actually, there are more complex variant of using this reality if there are several realities for different people. For example, one player could see the virtual reality, another can't see, and they need to interact. Or it can be in theater performance. Then some you can see that one of actor see virtual heroes, another can't see, and so on. Of course, this experience can be not only about places, but about time. And the other variant, then you the main idea, then you could experience other conscience. For example, you can be the inventor, that half of mind that in computer, or mentally ill person, or drag queen, or something like this, that you can see world by eyes of other person that have very different as usual experience that you can see. One of my characters was unusual experience, of course, is the main and the first character that was implemented in virtual reality, that to so the spectator player could be surprised, could be shocked, but what you can see. And now there are many artistic example of unusual presentation of words. For example, in its rise, as we can see, or something like Rorschach test that can be done, that you can see different things, and all those trees or something like this, or maybe broken. And there is some form of unusual experience that you can see. There is a mixing of light, color, sound, and it's actually guided by the participant voice. And returning to our discussion, I can see that here is you have some form of freedom, of course, because it's this word that is that you flying through is only depend on how you use your voice, and you can see this form of artistic digital meditation game. This unusual experience can, of course, be in very different form. For example, here you could see the four-dimensional shapes. Yeah, that's the idea, to have the that you could see things that you can never see in the real world, of course. Interaction is of course, it's now it's the problem for our virtual games, but it can be seen also that here is also we can see that we could actually we have not resistance of word, but you can be creative here. You can interact with other people, and you could touch them and do something, and the appearance on them could change now here. Yes, the so artistic project, that may be another form of freedom, not as resistance, but artistic freedom. Activity can be presented in different way, of course, as a game. You can see here, but other I think that I need to finish, but I think that I have some, maybe it could be done, because the most impressive for me experiment that has been done by this actually from cinema, yes, but for me the some form of virtuality of immersion in the virtual reality is not the question of freedom. A question of your maybe emotional response of those. It can be here the desert. You have experience of Mexican people who has been followed by police, by it doesn't I'm sorry, I think that I want to adjust in just about a minute, so I try to do it because for me it's a very interesting example. Of course, it's not the virtual reality, but we can see the experience that people have. Then police follow them.
Dari, if we need to watch some video right now, we don't see it. Yeah, just.
Oh, sorry. It's so, yeah, it's very, very bad. But no, it's very bad. But actually, you can see that yes, it's a project of your. I will not read, yes, but you. I think that you can see the name. Yes, that's about the very, very great experience. The people who interact with this Dorset, they have so much feeling. You can read this emotion that they felt as people who was followed by police that can be killed and so on. And actually, it's a very big course. And the last my example will be about a very interesting project that where video games and theater was merged. It's a game universe in which player move on non-linear quests, but there are also the live performance of several real actors. And it's actually a very interesting case. It's a fantasy world, the under presence. It's called a very interesting example of a combination of games and immersive theater that's imitated here. And actually, it can be played without actors as well. And it's the very interesting border between all this situation that you place with artificial intelligent person or with a real person. And at the end, I want to say that actually the artistic virtual reality strives to immerse the audience in the narrative, depending on their interaction with environment and characters. It's very interesting. Now it's not the finish of the using of possibility of virtual reality, and modern creators do not fully understand the possibility, but it's already obvious that how powerful this technology could be. It's able to give a person a deep and multifaceted experience, and transforming reality, expanding the possibility of true experience, gives virtual reality the potential of powerful technology for transforming our world, for transforming our future. Thank you very much. I'm sorry that's a technical problem.
Yeah, thank you. Daria, does somebody have a question to Daria? No? Yeah, yes, that was a problem that we couldn't watch the video. That Lena Olli has a question, so please.
Sorry, I didn't know how to raise my hand on Zoom, so I raised it physically. Daria, you mentioned the second last example. Can you tell more about that experiment? What kind of creative experiments they were talking about? I was wondering if you could talk about the difference of what does the game bring to the theater there? Because in your last example, there was some kind of game being played. And I understood maybe the previous example was just going into the virtual reality, but no game involved.
Actually, I don't want to say only about game. I actually want to say that we have the new genre that combines games, theater, cinema, art, and for example, in Venice Biennale, there are a project that was the competition and win. After Biennale, you can see one of them in cinema, one of them in computer games, one of them in only art. Virtual reality has no any genre. Actually, it's a new genre, and I don't want to say that it's computer game. I just my idea was it's not that we need to to separate game from not game, but to speak about virtuality of person. To what extent it immersive in this virtual world. And the purpose of my speech was that this immersion can be actually without resistance, without failure or something like this, but by emotional immersion in this world. And it was example, then you have a very strong feeling. Then you asked among Mexicans pursuing for crossing the border, and the people, they falling on the knees, they just try to hide themselves and something like this. It's very, very impressive feeling of the participant in this. And I can see that, for example, freedom, then you playing, yes, you kill the zombie in the game, and it's maybe the more virtuality, more immersive, that if you actually have no freedom, you have freedom to do that you want in this virtual reality, because it's the reality. Then you could go to any site to hide or to do something like this. You are just the part of all these people. You have that life existing in this situation. It's and I think it can be actually seen as a game. For me, I'm not a specialist, big specialist in video games. I am actually interested in all virtuality of internet interaction. So for me, it's game. It's some form of maybe another form, but for me, it's game. I don't know. Maybe I'm not right.
Thank you.
So yes, thank you, Daria. Thank you, Olli, for your question. And yeah, I think it's time now to go to the next talk, and to the last talk for today by Ksenia Zhernova. And yes, as I remember, Ksenia, you're here? Yes? Or...
yes, I'm here.
Yeah. Okay. And oh, I'm sorry, I think I lost your title. Yeah, the possibilities of art games and the possibilities of art games and art in games. So that was it. So please, you may start right now.
Yes, hello again. Just give me a second. I'm joining from my PC to be able to show some presentation. Just 1 second. And just another 1 second. It's loading. Okay. So I try to share the screen. Yes, so yes, sorry for the delay. Hello again. My name is Ksenia, and I'm going to talk about the possibilities of art games and art in games. And I even gave it a title, Making an Accomplice. First of all, I would like to say that there will be parts of it where I will disagree a little bit with Olli. I hope that it's okay. First of all, I would like to say that the notion of art games has a vague shape as well as the answer to the question, what is art? In this talk, I avoid defining what art is or what art game is, since these are topics for long discussions and we don't go there. Instead, within the frame of my talk, I take one point which art in general and art games in particular surely do. Art, as well as art games, can raise difficult questions and topics. They can provoke us to look deep inside ourselves and to dialogue with ourselves. Taking this into account, I will try to navigate the hazy environment of art games by focusing on one of the key differences between games and other mediums. It's the ability to make the player not just a participant, but rather an accomplice in everything the game has to offer. Games can happen within the games can happen within the player's input. Arsenal and Perron, as well as many other researchers in game studies, appeal to the notion of a game cycle. The player makes an input, the game analyzes this input and gives corresponding output to the player. The player then analyzes this output and makes corresponding input again, and so on. We see this in the left image. But since the game is progression, so we divide ourselves from the circle and go to the cycle. So that's why Arsène and Perron divided from the circles as well, to include the player's progression through the game, as we see on the right image. So keeping in mind all of the above, here I would also like to refer to the possibility of failure. The presence of a fail state is often used to define video games, but there are games without fail state in them. And these games are not always from the interactive film genre. While I agree with Olli that in general contemporary art games are indeed tragic, my suggestion is that not only a fail state can be avoided, but also the art game can be a strong art piece without the fail state. So, as I said before, gameplay is a cycle, and the necessity of a player's input make the player responsible for everything that happens in the game. So he's not just a participant, he's an accomplice in every single event that can happen in the game world. And this in itself, in my opinion, is already a sufficient artistic tool. Thus, this complicity, even without the possibility of failure, can be enough for creating an authentic art game. But of course, there's always a specific condition. This artistry can be achieved only if this tool is used properly. We talked about gameplay cycles, and what's really important for being an accomplice in the game is gameplay itself. The process of playing the game, the input of a player. And in recent times, the whole game industry tends to be more casual. Like games are always an easy mode of play, and with all the cheat codes already applied. So of course, this spreads on art games as well. And we do see so many of them way too easy to play, way too casual, requiring the barest minimum of the player's sections of his input. So contemporary art games lack the gameplay, as if these games are afraid to be too hard, or even medium hard, so to speak. Artists who choose games to use as their voice often don't use tools that make the game a game. These artists, as well as their target audience, the players of their games, may be not hardcore gamers themselves, or even not experienced enough gamers. But in my opinion, even if that's right, I wouldn't call this a problem. It just shows that games have a long path ahead. For example, to make a movie, write a book, or paint a picture, knowledge of the medium is required from an artist. The artist must know how and be able to use the tools of the chosen medium. There are some requirements for the recipient as well, but since these mediums don't require the recipient to be a participant to that extent as it's required in games, thus said requirements are easy to meet compared to the requirements of games. What we see now is a lowered entry bar for games, and not just art games, but games in general as medium. But in my opinion, games can be so much more. The art game can be created within any genre. I point just two examples. The game This War of Mine, which I mentioned in my first talk here, so I wouldn't go to this yet again, because I really love this game and always mention it. The game is a wholly survival game, so it's basically the game from survival genre. And another game, as seen in the picture on the slide, is the game Inside, which is pretty hard platform game, at least from today's perspective of hardcore gameplay. In short, Insight has a multi-layered narrative which explores the interactions between the player and the game, and even uses metagaming as an artistic tool, which is really, really great made in this game. Both of these games have a fail state in them, which I agree. But since both of these games touch on the topic of death, or more precisely of killing, using a fail state is justified. But these games wouldn't be so bold and accurate in their message if they didn't provoke the player to actually play, to make an input, to act inside the game world rather than just push a few buttons. So my point is, the games need gameplay, and the more they have, the better, especially for art games, to be able to make an accomplish from the player. There is difference between killing using a drone while pushing the button from a comfy office, killing from a distance by pulling the trigger of a gun, or choking someone with bare hands. Some of this is more personal than the other, in the frame of the thought experiment, of course. Games are the same, in my opinion. The more you act, rather than push the button to act, and the more the game enables you to act, the more personal this experience will be for you. Thus, the game may not have a fail state, it may even not have a challenge at all, but it has to have sufficient gameplay. And this is relevant not only for creating an accomplice in game murders, but an accomplice in general, in each and every event within the game. The player has to feel, has to believe that he owns his actions, their outcomes, and all of their circumstances and consequences. And this cannot be achieved in any other medium but games. Accordingly, the less gameplay is left in the game, the less personal the experience becomes, and the less possibility of making an accomplish from the player is left in the art game. So, finalizing everything, in my opinion, art games need sufficient gameplay to be able to use the medium's strength to their fullest and create an authentic art experience. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ksenia. And does anybody already have, yeah, I see myself. Yeah, I see that's Olli with a question. Yeah, please.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Ksenia. You noted that there is gameplay that does not need a fail state, gameplay that does not need a challenge, but which still immerses the player and makes the player into an accomplice. Have you thought of this in such detail that what then makes the player an accomplice? If there is no fail state, if there is no challenge, how is the player tied into the action? And the other dimension of the question is then, how would that be different from just saying that there is interactivity? What is it that is different from just being interactivity that then takes the player in and makes the player an accomplice? Sorry for not being very clear, but
no, I got you. That's a good question. Actually, I myself thought about that. Regarding your first part, I probably remember an example of the art game that, if I remember correctly, doesn't have a fail state. It's 12th September, probably you heard about it. As I remember, it doesn't have a fail state, but it's an art game because it raises an important topic and have an answer, and the player probably can't interpret that answer another way than the designer has designed it. Regarding your second part, actually, I probably don't have an answer, but I may guess that it's the extent of the player's presence in the game. So everything that happens in the game is because of the player. As far as I know, interactive art is related to the viewer, to the participant. but not to that extent. But I'm not sure that this is the question that I would that this answer is what I will go with. So probably I don't have an answer.
So I just also wanted to ask a small question. Then, what actually in the end of your talk, I didn't quite understand what in what extent would you disagree with Olli, actually, because you also in the end said that yes, gameplay is important, and that in art games, yeah, probably in the art games of the future, the problem of art games is that they don't have a great gameplay. And Olli also said something similar to it, as I understand, at least, yeah, that maybe the artistic form of the game is about gameplay and about this gameplay condition, and you are saying that that we also need a great gameplay in art games, yeah. And so in that for that reason, I did not quite understand what direction does your disagreement go. Yeah.
Oh, yes, thank you. I maybe made myself not very clear. I had disagreed. I disagreed with the part of the necessity of fail state in the game. In the game in general and in the game as an art game. Because in my opinion, the game doesn't has to have a fail state to be an art game, but it has to have a gameplay. So we could avoid the possibility of failure and still have a game.
So okay, your idea is that we need to we can divide, that we can discern between failure, state of the failure, and gameplay, that we can introduce some gameplay experience and gameplay condition without failure. Okay, without the condition of failure. Yeah.
Yes, exactly that.
Okay, so now I get this point, and I also get the small conversation that you with Olli have had right now. Okay, thanks. And Daria also had some question.
Yes, thank you. And I actually speak about that some art game that has no plots. Actually, I have example. I'm sorry that you can't see that there are some interactive game that you only that you need to interact with the space, and there actually there is, I think that there is not gameplay, or it's also the gameplay.
If I'm getting your question right, as far as I understand gameplay, it's everything that you do in the game, and the game responses to you, and you interpret that response, and that is the gameplay. So I guess that games can have a little of gameplay, so a little of interaction and input-output from the player to the game and from the game to the player. But probably it's like a gradation of the gameplay, I guess, if I got your question correctly.
Yeah, thank you. For me, it's very interesting because you can see that I speak about some form of virtual reality that can be seen as theater, as a cinema, and actually you can do something, but it's you have now the actually you have you don't have the output, but you can perceive it as output, something like this. Yeah, thank you. I understand.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Daria, and thank you, Ksenia, again for your talks and for this Q&A section. Yeah, I think we can really come to the finish of this meeting. So does anyone else have something to say? Maybe some questions, some other wishes or something else? Or maybe announcements, because it's we'll have 5 more minutes for just conversations and so on. I think it's not. Yeah, so then I will make a small announcement about our plans for the future. And as I think, as you remember, we are having our meetings each 2 weeks. And next one, which means that meeting will be held on the I'm sorry, on the 24th, of course, on the 24th of January, and it will be a talk. Yeah, the keynote speaker will be Alesha Sirada on games and money. Yeah, about the currency in games and so on, and about financial transactions in games. And I think it will be interesting. So, as usually, I will make an announcement, an announcement about this in Facebook group as well. So please make your comments to this post by me, so that you could make small reactions to small talks after the talk by keynote speaker. So thank you. Anyway, I think it was a great meeting today. It was nice to see all of you. Thank you all. Bye then. Goodbye.
Bye everyone.